have you even read the judge's decision today?
No, it literally came out today. I'm sorry, I don't do this full time.
Fair enough, but then why are you taking a stance on it if you haven't read it?
Because
would you say he's done good work on vaccine stuff?
But see, that's the point you guys always go to.
I'm asking you a question. I'm not making a point. This is by definition dictatorial.
It's by definition dictatorial.
For the executive branch to ignore checks and balances, yes.
Micah Kunkel, Luke Melkelzian, Mason, and Adam Comm, thank you guys so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jake.
So for those who don't know, these four guys have been on Jubilee debating, was it Ben Shapiro for Mason and Adam, and Destiny or Stephen Bennell for Micah and Luke. So I wanted to bring the five of us together to discuss DOGE, to discuss DEI, and to discuss immigration and really get to the core of what's going on with this new administration. You hear two conflicting realities about the matter, and I want to ask these four folks here what they think. So, Micah and Luke, have the DOGE cuts been good or bad for the U.S.? Maybe you guys could expand on this for a couple minutes. Like, why do you think what Elon is doing is good or bad for the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go ahead and go. I think there's a lot of government waste. And I realize that, like, percentage wise, as far as the deficit goes, we're not making a huge indent in that. But I think, $8 billion saved is $8 billion saved. Like, that's still really good. And so having Elon and a team go through and basically with a fine comb and go through all these things and identify areas of just complete waste of taxpayer money is a good thing. Honestly, this issue kind of shocks me from a Democrat side, why you would even disagree with something like this. Balancing budgets, like going through, finding where you're wasteful in spending, that's just a good thing overall. And just the different things that they've cut, like they found $1.5 million to advance DEI programs in Serbia. Why the heck are we doing something like that? $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. Like, this money that taxpayer dollars that are given to the U.S. government should be used to help American citizens. And these things that they're finding have nothing to do with actually helping American citizens.
Mason, Adam, do you guys agree or disagree with that?
I would say I highly disagree. And just off the bat, I think the main misunderstanding here that seems to be present in the MAGA movement is that the executive branch does not appropriate funds. This is done by Congress. And as we saw today, I mean, MAGA spent 4 years telling us that we're fear-mongering by calling Trump a dictator and authoritarian. He's defying court orders. He's defying the legislature. He's defying both other branches of government. If you have an issue with this grant to Serbia or whatever, that's done by Congress. Call your congressperson. The president does not have the constitutional authority to just randomly pick and choose which laws he does and doesn't want to enforce. And yes, you're going to find some weird grants here and there for a few $1 million out of the $6 trillion that we spend every year. But that's part of the normal deal-making process of Congress. I'm sure you're going to find a lot of weird stuff going to farmers in Idaho or Missouri or whatever too. That's kind of like the wheeling and dealing of Congress. I'm sure there's some fluff in there that we could cut out. I'm on principle not opposed to cutting inefficiency. Inefficiency is obviously a bad thing. But what's actually happening here is this is a way to sort of virtue signal and publicize, like, we're going after the DEI, we're going after the waste. But what they're really doing is they're trying to cut back eventually our benefits and entitlements, even though they're saying they're not going to do that. And secondly, they don't even have the authority to do this in the first place. So I think it's kind of silly to argue on the merits of, are these cuts good or not? Because they don't have the authority to make these cuts in the first place.
But that's the second point. It's hard to jump in. I know there's a lot of us here, but I do want to jump in right there. So, Adam, you're bringing up a separate point, which is, like, do they even have the authority? We can get into that, but let's just
I think it's the primary point.
But the question is, are the cuts good or bad? And it sounds like you're in agreement with Micah. You're saying it is okay to cut these things if they are wasteful.
It depends on the things, right? Because, like, when we talk about these grants, these were passed in legislation. So, like, this was already appropriated by Congress. These are things we can change by calling our Congress people. But again, when Congress passes, like, a bill for, like, $200 billion. The way deal making works to get the votes, get through the filibuster and everything, there's going to be concessions made on each side where you're going to have grants going to people's pet projects and stuff. You can argue that's a bad thing, and maybe it is, but then if you don't have those things present, then these deals are never going to get made. And Trump talks about the art of the deal. Part of the art of the deal is that you're going to have some of these grants that maybe you don't want, but in the grand scheme of things, again, and Micah conceded this, so that's fair, but cutting a few $1 million out of $6 trillion is the equivalent of cutting pennies out of like a 5-figure, 6-figure budget. So I don't know how much we can say this is like efficient versus just virtue signaling from the right.
Yeah, and then my name's Mason. I'm also known as One Hand Politics for those that don't know if you're watching the video or the stream. But I think that there's also just a misunderstanding that this agency is enforcing a lot of these cuts, where it actually is just identifying. And it's interesting to me where they're trying to find and identify where these holes are, which to Adam's point are really just virtue signaling to right wingers who are trying to win the culture war. Like Elon Musk today came over this big conspiracy saying that the Biden administration is paying for luxury hotels for undocumented migrants. That is provably false. Not only were migrants used in certain housing places just because there was a lack of infrastructure in most of the border cities in which they were detained, but the implication here, it's a big Mont Bailey where, yes, the government was paying for some housing for undocumented migrants. Therefore, the government is either incentivizing people to come here during the Biden administration, or people are fleeing their homes, fleeing their communities because they want to stay in a hotel room in the United States. And that's the incentive for them to go through one of these life-changing, life-threatening actual journeys in order to get to a country that doesn't even treat them with the humanity that they deserve. So for me, it's really an agency that's meant to identify what are buzzwords that we can get our Republican base riled up about instead of where are actual efficient cuts. Because they've said that they want to audit the Pentagon. Let's see if they actually do that. That'd be something that I'm in agreement with, because the Pentagon has failed almost every audit that they've done. But until I see some tangible evidence that that's where there is the direction that they're heading, it really is just trying to stir up the culture war.
And Adam, you're saying the fundamental question, and I want to ask Luke this, is I think you're challenging me on the premise of the question I asked, which is, are the cuts good or bad? And what you're saying is that there's something more fundamental than that, which is that the president should not be doing this. Congress should be
just
doing
to
this.
give an analogy to kind of like make my point more clear. Like if I had an issue with my car's engine and some random dude broke into my car and started fiddling with the mirrors, I'd be like, he's like, I'm trying to fix your car. Like, first of all, I shouldn't even be in there. Second of all, what you're doing is so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And I do want to add, Musk doesn't have the authority to cut things, but the OMB did freeze funding. And today that was found that
Trump
Trump
have the authority. So I want Luke to respond to your point, but so just to kind of make it concise. So you're saying that it's illegal for Trump and through him, Elon, to be cutting things. And what is your what's your claim that it's not legal for?
Yeah. So my claim is that Trump is violating the Constitution. He's defying both the legislative and the judicial branch. Number one, by not going in accordance with his oath of office to enforce the laws as they were passed. And number two, it was reported today, a judge has now said you are defying court order. That hasn't happened in modern history. That is very authoritarian.
Luke, do you have an opinion on that? Whether Trump is violating the Constitution with regards to these cuts?
Something I wanted to touch on is something that we haven't really heard from anybody, and kind of is my argument. And I would say it's a lot of what Americans are looking for is it's transparency. Americans want to know where our tax dollars are going to. And, if there's anything to gain from this, it's transparency from both sides. From the left, from the right, there hasn't been as much transparency as we need. But when you really look into this, I know Micah touched a little bit on it, but we sent $50 million to Gaza for condoms. Like, what American wants their tax money going to that? We've spent millions of dollars promoting and pushing an LGBTQ agenda in various countries, in Uganda, in the Balkans. It's not something to argue or not argue. These are what they've come out with. These are numbers that they've come out with. We've spent a lot of these expenses that we're seeing are towards this woke agenda that's been being pushed. And I don't care if it comes, you're making an argument of it's coming through Congress or what. There's an agenda that's being pushed. And what I like most about this is that there's transparency that is being shown. And if there's transparency being shown that there's some things that are going towards, expenses that liberals would say conservatives shouldn't be doing, Americans want to see that transparency as well. But we live in a time of government where transparency is diminishing. And I think their big goal in all this is to inform Americans where our money truly is going to.
And Micah, is Trump violating the Constitution as Adam claims?
Well, no, and a question I wanted to ask Adam is: so, is your claim that Congress is budgeting and saying, "Hey, we are going to give like $1.5 million for DEI programs in Serbia"? Is that your claim that Congress signed a bill that specifically said we are going to do $1.5 million for DEI programs in Serbia?
My claim is that there's going to be a lot of grants that are insignificant in the broader scheme of federal spending that are going to be part of negotiating in Congress, whether that's left to the discretion of the agencies to determine which exact things they're going towards, or they're specified.
Well, that's a yes or no question. It's a yes or no question.
Program. It depends on the program in question.
Okay, so yeah, exactly. So that's where Congress gives money to specific programs, and then within the programs, the executive branch can determine how much money goes to what or where it goes specifically. And so if you're going to set up a bureaucracy of executive programs, for a president who's the head of the executive branch to say, hey, we're going to cut this specific funding in this program, and we're not going to have it go over here. We're going to have it go over here or something like that. That is totally within his constitutional power and authority.
Not according to the judge that's ruled against him in court and that he's now defying. And again, there is a difference between changing, like there's some discretion the executive branch does have in how funds are spent, but that depends a lot on the legislation in question and how much authority or discretion has been given to them. And again, it's one thing to move funds around. Just freezing funds fully and revoking the discretion of these agencies to make these decisions when they have career civil servants with civil service protections is a very different question. Do you think
that's permanent though? Like, do you think the freezing of funds is permanent, or is it, hey, let's stop spending money and let's make sure that we're spending it efficiently, and then let's get back on track?
It doesn't matter if it's permanent or not. It's a matter if you have the authority to do this in the first place.
No, it absolutely does matter whether it's permanent or not. Because Congress gives a specific amount of money for a program. And so if you're saying, hey, we're going to stop spending money for the time being, but then spend the rest of the money the rest of the year, I don't see how that violates anything Congress has passed.
I mean, again, you can read the court's decision on this. This is very clear civics that the president does not have this power. The OMB memo had to be rescinded. They kept freezing funds. And again, this is not a small thing that Trump is defying court orders. This has never happened in modern American history. You can try to defend it if you want, but I mean,
come on, that's ridiculous. Biden did the exact same thing, especially when it came.
Because that's not
exactly with student loans.
No, Biden tried to use the HEROES Act to forgive student loan debt. The Supreme Court said no, and he said, okay, I'll try a different way. That's judicial review. What's not judicial review is to just outright defy a court's ruling.
Is that what he's doing, Micah? Is Trump going against the court's ruling?
Yeah, the judge himself said, you guys can Google this today.
Well, and I mean, this is where we are only 20 days into the presidency. And so, we'll see if this gets challenged in court. This is a fresh ruling. So, we can't treat it like it's an established ruling that's going to stand for the rest of time.
Well, it doesn't matter how early you are into administration. If you see the warning signs of somebody that's acting without their jurisdiction, that's already cause to stop.
Yeah, but there's debate on whether that is within their jurisdiction.
Right,
so,
but the pivot here I think is interesting when there's clear showing that this is not something within their own authority. Like, you can't just say, well, let's hope that the judge rules that it is within their authority. If there are warning signs that are already showing that people are extending past what they're allotted through the Constitution, that's already cause enough in order to pause that action.
No, I don't think that's necessarily true. And I mean, really, to get back to it, DOGE
challenge. Even if there are any sort of warnings that you're violating the Constitution, you should just go ahead and try it to see if you can get away with it. Is that really the argument that you're going with?
Okay, but it has been paused. Like, this stuff has been paused. So I'm not really sure what you're talking about when it comes to there. Yes, it has. I mean, again, this is so recent. You can't expect, an immediate pause. But going back to it, DOGE is again, more of a transparency, kind of what Luke was saying is a transparency type program that are giving recommendations to programs. The programs themselves are actually going to be the ones that implement these changes that DOGE recommends. And so I don't understand what's unconstitutional about that.
I mean, it's great for DOGE to come in
with
with like the idea or the guise of that we're going to add more transparency. But I'd like for DOGE to be more transparent with how much sensitive data that they're getting access to that are at risk of the American people. I mean, DOGE right now has sensitive financial data from the Treasury Secretary Scott Bensett, who said that they are already causing millions of jobs to be at risk because of the data that they're taking from people's personal finances. Like, when is this unelected bureaucracy that Trump and Elon have both been railing against suddenly get the authority to access millions of Americans' personal data that puts them at risk? That's not something that we should be advocating as a beneficial program.
Who's unelected? Trump was elected, and then Elon works for him, right?
No, these bureaucrats. The big thing of Trump trying to drain the swamp was getting rid of people who are in positions that are unelected or unaccountable to the American people. We're not saying that Trump isn't elected. Obviously, he won. But people like Elon and his 25-year-old boys that he's bringing in, like these are not people that have any accountability from the American
Elon
people.
works for Trump.
legal right.
Elon works for Trump, right?
And that's hilarious that you're saying that you have a concern with DOGE not being accountable to the American people, yet the programs that they're investigating are giant bureaucracies that have no accountability to the American people. I mean, if you're going to apply that argument to DOGE, please go ahead and apply it to the rest of the programs within the federal government.
Thoughts, Adam? Or
I mean, again,
I kind of just had a question for Adam.
Yeah.
My biggest point on this, to be honest, is I try to approach things as how American people are going to see it.
Mhm.
Average American doesn't know half the stuff you guys are talking about. But what I do know is that the average American wants transparency. And so, the American people, we want our money to be going towards benefits that are things that will benefit our best interests as a country. Do you think it was in our best interest as a country to give $10 million for food supplies for terrorists associated with Al-Qaeda? Do you think that was in our best interest?
The way you're framing that makes me very suspicious of the specifics of the case, so I'm not going to speak to that. I want to address what Jake was asking about earlier in regards to what you were saying.
You can't answer it.
When Congress,
we sent money.
So you're telling me there's like a bill that was passed to get terrorists? Like, what are you saying?
So one of the expenses
I don't trust your accounting of this because MAGA's been lying about these programs
$10
for the
million
past week.
that we spent to go towards 4 meals for terrorists with direct association with Al-Qaeda. That is not in America's best interest.
To the extent that terrorists are getting U.S. funds, obviously I oppose that. Obviously, no one is going to support that, obviously.
And so that's what
the way
we're
these
pushing
things are
for
being
is
framed,
Micah and I want more transparency to the American.
Transparency is fine. That's not what's happening right now with DOGE. Because number one, a lot of these things are already in the public record. It's just that they're not like sexy. The mainstream media is not going to talk about like this $1.2 million grant going to this one country out of our, again, $6 trillion spending every year. Number two, I already said this in the beginning, if there's legitimate cases of waste, fraud, and abuse, cut them. Obviously, that's bipartisan. But again, and Mason agrees with me on this, this is all virtue signaling. And a lot of these programs are being framed in a way to be like red meat for the right. Like, look at this DEI, look at these terrorists. And it's like, when you actually read the fine print, it's never as straightforward or as negative as the right paints it out to be in a lot of cases. So I just find it dishonest.
Well, I mean, Adam, you made a lot of big sweeping claims there, but I didn't hear almost a single shred of evidence for any of that. What do you mean it's virtue signaling? To cut government waste is virtue signaling?
The types of programs that they're calling attention to and the way they're discussing them, the way they're inaccurately describing some of them, like the Politico thing, which was just for subscriptions for employees, like these things are being framed to paint a certain narrative that goes with the MAGA worldview. It's not a good faith effort. There's no Democrats that are part of this commission. Like, it's very clearly being done to basically like gin up support and raise tensions in the country.
So like how CNN and all these leftist media groups have been doing for years. I know we're talking about immigration, but why didn't they talk about all of the people that were murdered, the innocent individuals that were murdered by illegal immigrants? They didn't touch upon it. So they have their own agenda.
I mean, just because you didn't
you're
read
gonna
it,
make one
I'm
claim,
sure if
look
you
the
search it
other
on
way.
CNN, you'll find a lot of these things in the news. Just because it didn't show up on your feed doesn't mean it didn't happen, right?
When a 2-year-old boy is innocently murdered by an illegal immigrant, that should be the headline of the day on CNN. It wasn't mentioned once.
It should be
So
the
I don't wanna
headline of the
hear
day,
this
no
person
matter
who's
what else
killed.
has happened in the world. Like, there's no editorial discretion with media.
What?
Editorial discretion.
That's irrelevant actually to
saying
Luke's
is
point,
they're
because Luke's
pushing
point is that it
3%
didn't show up at all.
Yeah.
There's no article written about this whatsoever.
But honestly, an article doesn't
That's-
cut it. Because
Okay, so now we're
something
shifting
like
the
that,
goalpost.
Okay,
because
but
they don't
I think
wanna-
you're
they
showing
don't
your
wanna
own hand
talk-
right now, Luke,
they
by
don't wanna
saying that
talk
you
about
want
it because
prioritized
it's
in the
gonna
mainstream
show and
media
it's gonna
are people
expose
that
the
are not
truth of
coming
what's
from this
going
country.
on.
Like, you're showing what you're prioritizing as far as what you want
The
specifically
safety of
highlighted.
American people, yeah, that's what I'm prioritizing.
No, nobody's saying that the safety of the American people shouldn't be prioritized, but you're saying one of the top stories should be somebody not from this country has done a crime within the United States.
Has murdered an innocent citizen of our country, yes.
Yes, we're not saying that the murder is justified or the murder shouldn't have been reported on. To Adam's point, it was reported on, but you saying that this should be in like the focal point of the mainstream media or on television networks shows that you only want those instances prioritized. There are going to be millions of murders that happen in America. That's not discounting the seriousness of any of them, but you're not going to be able to put this on prime time, every single murder that happens in the United States.
The reason they don't expose it is because it's going to go against the agenda they're pushing.
No person who's in favor of more migration says that immigrants don't commit crimes. I've never met one of those.
At the end of the day, murders happen every day. But at the end of the day, this is happening because of an individual that shouldn't be there.
Luke, wouldn't you say that we would see these reflected within? Do you believe in law enforcement? Are you a big black the blue guy?
Yeah.
Okay, law enforcement has shown that not even on average, statistically, there are more proportional crimes committed by natural-born American citizens than people who come from other countries.
Yeah, and that's the point we hear from the left all the time. And
a true point. Yeah, we're going to keep saying it.
As unfair as this sounds, those people who are committing these murders that are Americans, they are Americans legally, at least. That doesn't discount the fact of the murder, but they are here legally. They should, of course, be reported.
Yeah, I'm going to tell the victims' parents that, at least you were killed by an American citizen. Can you be proud of that? At least it wasn't someone from a different nation.
Let's get back on topic for a second. I want to sorry to pick on you guys, Mason and Adam, but I think on principle, you guys are on board with transparency and cutting waste. I know that you're attributing bad motives. I know that you're attributing bad motives to Elon Musk and Donald Trump. You're saying it's virtue signaling. You're saying you're doing it illegally. Humor me and just put aside whether he's violating the Constitution. Don't you agree with Micah and Luke that it's good to cut funding to terrorist groups, that it's good to cut funding when it's wasteful, even if it's only 1% of the GDP?
If that's the premise of the question, that it's by definition wasteful spending that's going to terrorists, then obviously, yeah. But I would take issue with, like, how are these programs being described? When he says we're giving terrorists food, am I going to pull this article up later and find out that, like, we sent money to some charity and then one person in that charity, his, like, uncle was part of the Taliban for, like, a month? Like, I'm not saying that's the case, but, like, these things are complicated and it's very easy to paint broad narratives that fit in line with, like, a certain ideology. All I'm saying is that these things are not as straightforward as they seem on the surface. Again, I'd reference the Politico example. And then also, if you want to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, when we spend $6 trillion, sure, like, even if we're wasting $1, cut it. But when we're talking about prioritizing things, when Elon Musk's big, like, magnum opus is like a few $1 million here and there, it makes me question how he's going to get to the $2 trillion he was talking about, when, again, our entire discretionary budget is $1.7 trillion.
Yeah, and neither Adam or I are against cutting, again, where things are wasteful. But Luke coming into this conversation talking about Hamas getting condoms is proof in itself that this agency is exactly for theater. This is for riling up people that are already predisposed to fear tactics and getting people to challenge programs that aren't even in existence. Can you point to me the executive order that authorized condoms for Hamas, Luke? Or are you just saying what you saw in an Elon Musk tweet?
Frankly, any money that went to Hamas is too much.
Yeah, where did it go to Hamas? Like, that's my question here. What's the specific executive order that authorized Hamas?
That question's already flawed because it's not an executive order; it's a program.
Where's the
USAID?
Point to that then, Mike?
USAID.
USAID. Do you know where they gave contraceptions? To Jordan. This wasn't to Hamas. This wasn't even to people within that region.
Okay. Either way,
it does. how is America's best interest in that?
$46,000. I spent more on that on a vehicle. Like that, this is not something that should
how
be.
is that benefiting Americans?
But do you
Ask your
see how you're
Congress people.
prioritizing that one specific example? Like to what Adam said, this is pennies that are given.
I have probably.
If you want to take on government spending, you should be advocating for Social Security cuts and Medicare cuts. Why isn't Trump touting that? Because he knows that it's poison politically?
Let me speak to that. So if you're Elon Musk and Donald Trump and you want to cut a bunch of money, what are you going to do? You're going to go for the low-hanging fruit, the flashy stuff. It makes sense. You're
$46,000, Jake? Do you think that that's an adequate way to cut?
I don't know. I'm saying like
of a penny.
I want
to $6 trillion.
And that's what Adam and I are saying is sure, that cut that 46,000, but the only reason why it was prioritized is for political theatrics. It's to get people like Luke fired up saying, oh my God, did you hear that they're having gay sex in Hamas? And we're promoting that with our budget? Like this is not something that's beneficial towards any.
If it doesn't benefit the overarching American people, we should have it.
But Mason, it doesn't make the cut wrong. Right? Let me grant you that it was theatrical. It doesn't make it wrong to cut it.
It'll kill them to ever give any
Mason?
credit to this administration.
No, I'm saying
I want Donald Trump to succeed. I live in a country that is under his authority. Why would I be advocating for the country's worst interests? What I'm saying is the focus of these theatrics is specifically shows what their interests and their intents are. Jake, I'm not saying that we shouldn't cut it. Sure, I'll grant you. Let's cut it. But I'm saying the reason why we're talking about it right now is by design. It's to get us talking about Hamas condoms and not about the wasteful spending that goes into our U.S. military.
And also,
or Trump wanting to annex Gaza. Talk about government spending. Oh my God!
No, we're in favor of that. That's the thing. Is we're okay with going through the Pentagon, going through the military, and cutting wasteful spending. We're all for that.
I love that.
But the problem is we have these other programs that are clearly wasting money. And you guys are bringing it up like it's like an issue.
46,000.
And no, yeah, okay, Mason, it's one that's
like human rights, and then USA determine which grants that money is going to go to. But that money is already delegated to like the broad umbrella term of like human development programs in foreign countries. You might have a problem with Congress doing that, but again, like the way this is being painted out is like this is the deep state. They're spending money behind your back. You have no idea about it. Trump is going in, and him and Elon Musk are saving the country. In reality, Congress is complicated. The bureaucracy is complicated. These things are never as simple as they seem. And if you want to fix them, you go through the legislature. You don't violate the Constitution.
You're not violating the Constitution.
So Mike is saying it is.
I'm sorry, it is.
No, it's not.
Why not?
Have you even read the judge's decision today?
No, it literally came out today. I'm sorry, I don't do this full time.
Fair enough, but then why are you taking a stance on it if you haven't read it?
Because these programs themselves are unconstitutional. I mean, the U.S. Constitution, it doesn't authorize the federal government to loan or grant money to anyone. So, these programs themselves are unconstitutional.
But in other countries,
what?
Congress does pass funds that are meant for like human development in other countries. The USAID might have discretion on which grants specifically.
Yeah, but is that in the Constitution? Your claim is specifically, is it constitutional?
The legislature appropriates funds, yes. Power of the purse. It's like Civics 101. And this is again, you're saying that like this is allowed. It should be fine. What the judge said is I'm putting a restraining order on this freeze. You can't freeze anything. Let's hear the case. If Trump wins on the merits of the case, great. But that hasn't happened yet. And in the meantime, the executive branch has to comply with the courts. If like this is by definition dictatorial. By definition.
It's by definition dictatorial.
For the executive branch to ignore checks and balances, yes.
Are they ignoring them, Micah?
Well, I don't know. You're saying that this court ruling came out literally today. So I don't understand how you can say that it's already dictatorial when it just came out today.
There were already 2 rulings made where they said you have to comply with this. The Trump administration and the OMB had until Friday to prove compliance. The funds are still frozen despite the restraining order. So today the judge said we gave them like a week to do this and they're not complying with the court order.
Yeah, I just don't know the details of the court order, so it's hard to respond specifically to that. But
it's been about 30 minutes. Let's move to DEI. Last time I started with Micah and Luke, so I want to ask Mason and Adam, why is DEI good? And I'm assuming you feel like there's been too much crackdown on DEI. There's a lot of scrutiny on it. What do you feel is the benefit to DEI for the country?
I think in a perfect world, we don't need to have any programs that highlight people's social identities, right? Because in a meritocracy, you just want people who are the most successful and people who are the most qualified, right? That is not something that is in contention, even within DEI programs themselves. The right likes to create this boogeyman of a government bureaucrat choosing somebody of a specific social identity or racial background over somebody that's completely qualified for a position. And that's just not true in the slightest. That at best, with affirmative action programs, you'll have two people that have similar backgrounds and similar qualifications, and there will be a decision to choose somebody that comes from a different perspective or a different cultural background in order to bring about a better understanding for the organization or for the company in general. That's something that most CEOs have said. I'm not the big CEO guy. I don't know why I'm advocating on their behalf, but I would say that Luke and Micah would say they make pretty good decisions when it comes to how businesses are able to operate. And if you bring in people from different backgrounds or different perspectives, you can say that that increases the vision of the organization. Why would I go into a strategic planning meeting without all of the ideas that I can get from different people of different backgrounds? So for me, it's a boogeyman. Like, I don't think that people are going to succeed any less without DEI programs. But I think that it's not something that should be as sensationalized as it is by people who are just pretty insecure about their own place within an organization.
And I just want to pitch in real quick, or do you want to let them go first?
No, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So like when we talk about DEI, it's a little frustrating because it seems like everyone defines it in the way that's like politically expedient for them to define it. So like, for example, when Trump talked about DEI and like the FAA with air traffic control causing the crash, this is a quote from air traffic control when they implemented this diversity program. The agency emphasized as it rolled out the initiative that candidates would receive the same rigorous consideration in terms of aptitude, medical, and security qualifications as those individuals considered for a standard public opening. What they changed is they basically expanded the applicant pool to include people who, number one, did not have access to extracurriculars growing up, and who, number two, are not making money until later on in life. So they're not lowering standards as much as they're trying to diversify the applicant pool. When it comes to things like affirmative action, maybe Mason will disagree with me, and this is kind of like maybe a hot take of mine as someone on the left. I do think that the Supreme Court correctly decided the affirmative action case. So like if we're talking about, taking race into account in that way, I think that's probably not a good idea. But I think DEI is often, sort of like misrepresented as being like, we're just going to pick the blind guy and put him on lookout duty or something. Like that's not what's really happening. They're trying to expand the applicant pool and bring people into the fold who are not typically part of the fold. And that does not have to mean that you're lowering standards. If you are lowering standards, sure, I think that's bad. But I think that's not usually what's happening here.
Micah and Luke, where do you disagree with that? What Mason and Adam just said about DEI and why DEI is not so bad at all, because it's meant to just bring in people who otherwise wouldn't be considered. It's not dismantling meritocracy. I mean, is that how you see it, Micah and Luke?
I feel like I've been talking a lot, but I'll go ahead. Yeah, I think the way practically it plays out is that it does end up prioritizing people just solely based off of sexual characteristics or race characteristics. And so even if there are things that are saying, we're going to, look at everyone fairly based off of merit, what it actually ends up doing is enabling people to choose based off of exactly. Not anything that is good. That it's not based off of like, hey, are you actually good at this job? Are you qualified or anything like that? But instead, it's based off of characteristics they can't change about themselves.
Can you point to sectors where that's happening, Micah, where people who are unqualified for a position are being chosen based on racial identity?
You had the executive order that Trump released where he banned all these DEI programs from government. Those would be specific government programs where that is happening.
Can you point to one?
Yeah. What's the, is it FFA?
FAA.
Or FAA, sorry. The FAA specifically had a staffing problem because of DEI.
That's just not true. And I already read from the FAA that they did not change hiring standards for this. You can make the argument that you think they're lying or something. The way this thing works is if you apply for a job at air traffic control, there's a certain threshold you have to meet to even be considered for the job in the first place. And then if out of that pool of applicants, they're looking for diversity, I don't think that's the same thing as lowering standards, because they're not just going to pick some random, disabled person or person of color. There's still certain boxes you have to check to get these jobs. And again,
do you think that these people are not going to like flight school in order to pilot a plane? Like they're just like a black guy and Biden is like, hell yeah, like we just need more black pilots. I don't care if they fly planes. Like, is that really what's happening in your mind, Micah?
No, but the emphasis doesn't become on merit. It now becomes based off of something else.
So two people
that they
pass
can't
a
change
flight
about
school,
themselves.
you're saying one gets like D's, but they're black, so they're going to get hired. I'm just trying to walk through the formula of what's going on here.
I'm saying, yeah, that's certainly possible.
Okay.
Underneath these programs.
Good to know.
I mean, I'll touch a little bit specifically with the FAA and their air traffic control hirees. I mean, they had a push to hire air traffic control individuals that literally had mental disabilities and had psychiatric disabilities. This is a job that, if you look at the definition and one of the requirements of an air traffic controller, it literally says you have to have a multitask mentality. If somebody is coming in because, they're getting picked and they have a mental disability, they probably should not be getting hired for this job. And it's really interesting that during the Biden administration, we saw an immense influx of individuals that were hired to be air traffic controllers that have these mental disabilities. And we're also seeing lawsuits currently of individuals that were not only met the requirements, but frankly were probably overqualified, that are suing the government because they got denied over somebody with a mental disability. If somebody...
So just to add some actual evidence to this conversation, what you're talking about, Luke, is that New York Post article that Trump read directly from, saying that there were severe intellectual disabilities or psychiatric problems for people that were being hired.
I'm not talking about
What's
that.
funny is the Trump era FAA had the exact same language on their website before Biden even took office. The FAA's language encouraging the hiring of people with disabilities, including psychiatric ones. Like, how are you going to have that within your own administration and then point the finger to somebody who succeeds you, who just adopts the exact same policies? If there should be any blame, shouldn't it be the Trump administration for creating these in the first place?
If that's the case, then yeah. Somebody with a mental disability should not be in a job that literally is deemed
This is very vague, though, because if someone applies and they're super qualified, and let's say like they had a history of depression or something, should they be like prevented from getting that job if they can still do the work perfectly fine? Like, how are we defining mental disability here? The way Trump described it, again, is like they picked some dude with no arms and they're like, your job is to push this button. I'm pretty sure if there's qualifications that have to be met to do these jobs, they're going to be met. They're not just going to arbitrarily throw people in there.
I would argue against that.
Micah, do you have thoughts on this?
Well, if someone maybe is missing a hand or something, they shouldn't be doing it.
That was a good one, Micah.
Oh, thank you.
Hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at, again, the FAA, and you can see that they had a specific goal, and their goal was to diversify its workforce by quote rethinking its hiring practices, specifically in regards to DEI. And this was the criticism at the time of the FAA. I keep messing that up. The FAA, that it was going to harm hiring practices and they were going to be short-staffed. And here we go. They were short-staffed. And so that's one example.
Were they short-staffed? So Mason and Adam, why were they short-staffed if it's not because of...
I mean, there's many reasons for that. They've been short-staffed for a while, and Trump did not make it better by putting a hiring freeze for these agencies to hire more people. And we know that when the DC plane crash happened, the person that was running that was, I think, in charge of like two different things, a job of two different people. One person was doing it. So if you want to fix these things, maybe hire more air traffic controllers, not less. And again, I want to emphasize when we talk about, diversifying the applicant pool, like I'll just make this a more concrete example. In many cases, if you are networking and you're in certain elite circles from certain elite institutions, you automatically have a foot in the door at places like government agencies. Whereas if you are just as smart, just as capable, but you don't have those connections, you don't have that experience, you might be just as good at the job, but maybe you're not getting the same opportunities. All these programs do is allow people that don't come from the same backgrounds who still meet the same standards to now be brought into the fold. I think that's a good thing.
I mean, I would just say if people are close in requirements, I'm sure there's another way where you can specify a differentiation of who is worthy of it than the other, aside from skin color.
It wasn't skin color. It was educational background and income background.
I'm not talking about that specifically. I'm just saying what we're seeing in generalization of DEI is they're saying two people that have the same requirements and they say, well, they have a different cultural perspective. There's plenty of other things you can break that down as to who outpaces somebody else in a requirement. Nobody's going to be so close in requirement that their skin color is going to be the separation. And I mean, I just look at, if you've watched the Super Bowl last year versus this year, you can see the vast difference in advertising. I mean, companies were dropping from DEI programs left and right because companies don't want this. If you truly look at it, so many large companies dropped the DEI programs instantly because they felt like they had this pressure under the woke administration of Biden that they had to cater to these DEI things. I mean, watching the ads this year versus last year, it's completely different. And I mean, one thing that I would talk about too is like people push for DEI. What about DEI within sports? Why don't we pushing for more Chinese players or, because sports, they actually look at the performance. And that's a perspective where you can outwardly see somebody's requirements taking place where, they don't have Chinese football players for a reason because they would not be making as much money. There would not be as much entertainment. And so when you break this down, like there's reasons why they're pushing for this agenda and they're pushing for DEI. It's just to cater to what they're trying to lead with.
Luke, I love that you're just being that open with not understanding statistical analysis, because do you think that a majority of Chinese folks in that culture are prioritizing things like playing football? Or do you think that it's more of like a cultural expectation within different communities? And that's how we get predominant members of certain communities to be in certain areas. Like it's like you're by definition showing that environmental causes or what can drive people towards certain preclusions. And that's exactly what we're trying to show. Is oftentimes not only were these from the communities within themselves, but these are pushed down from the American government. There's a reason why if you go towards places that are predominantly Black communities, you're going to see more people that are Black under the poverty line than white people. Is that because Black people don't work as hard? Or is that because there are certain systemic factors that can lead those people into those communities? What would you say to that? What do you think is the cause
my perspective
of Black Americans
on that is a pretty bold perspective. And I would say Black individuals today are struggling because of the liberal agenda. They're telling you, because you're Black, you can't do this. Because you're Black, you can't reach this goal. When I was growing up, my parents taught all three of my siblings and myself, that other person is just another person. You love them, you treat them the same. They may have a different skin color than you. Who cares? You guys on the left are the ones that are saying, because they're Black, they have less opportunity. They can't do what you have the quote unquote privilege to do.
Well, I don't think either Adam or I are saying that. I think statistically we're showing that the income levels are very stark. Like, I don't know how you're disagreeing with the evidence of
when you tell a community for so long that they can never reach something because of their skin color, eventually they're going to believe it.
Nobody has once said that you can't reach something because of the color of your skin. You're identifying a problem that needs to be alleviated. Nobody, who has said that?
The systemic thing that because of the world we live in, it's harder for you to succeed because of this,
Luke,
of that.
You gotta get your head right now out of the X mode, the X feed. You're having a conversation with us. You can ask us what we think about stuff. All right, the Fox News, whatever you want to go, InfoWars. You can fill in the blank with however you feel. But have a conversation with us right now where you're asking us what we believe instead of saying we're telling Black people or we're going to people of color saying you can't succeed in this country. Like that is absolutely not true.
That is what the left is doing.
Mike, I haven't heard from you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, your guys' how you've characterized DEI programs. Like they're just simply saying, oh, let's consider more people from more backgrounds, as opposed to saying like, no, we specifically need to have, 50% of our employees be a minority, or something like that. Like
I've already said I opposed that in the beginning.
So. Yeah, racial quota systems don't help.
Well, that's a huge part of DEI programs.
DEI programs are specific targeted programs that are going towards certain people. It's not like the racial quota hiring that makes it a mandate in certain industries. That's not what it is. It's allocating a certain amount of resources towards the development of certain communities. And it doesn't even go towards like all one race. It's not like there's specifically within a race. Like oftentimes these are communities where there are predominantly the same race. And the reason why they're going towards those communities is because oftentimes they've been the victims of things like redlining, things like racial policies that were specifically designed to keep people under. Nobody's advocating for like specific racial alleviation, but we're advocating for programs to alleviate intentional discriminatory laws that were passed. And obviously there are none on our
Does redlining still exist? I mean,
yes,
like
that's exactly what I was going to say. Obviously, there aren't on the books now, and you can say that there's a colorblind law that we currently live under. But to pretend like generational wealth is not something that's important is to deny the reality of economic conditions.
I mean, that's a claim that you're making. So I'm going to need to see some evidence.
So you're saying there's no evidence for generational wealth disparities? That's what you're saying right now, Micah?
No, you made the claim. You have the burden of proof. So I'd like to see what your proof is for that, and then discuss that. And whether generational wealth too, whether this has a major effect overall. I'm not saying that there's not a single instance where people got ahead because of generational wealth, but most millionaires in the country today didn't inherit their wealth. They built it themselves.
Let me ask you guys a question. Do you think it's at least plausible that there exist people that are entirely qualified for these positions, but because of factors outside of their control, like the zip code they were born in, where they went to school, what they had access to, that they have a much tougher time getting certain positions in the public and private sector for no fault of their own? Is that plausible?
Is it plausible? Let's see, plausible. I don't know if I would say it's plausible. I mean,
I feel like it's not that
does it ever?
I don't know why we have to fight on this. Like, there's clearly people that are very smart, but because of where they live, they can't make the right connections. They don't know the right people. They don't get in these circles where, like, it's not like any merit-based person is just getting a job at the FAA. You probably need to know people in DC. You probably need to know the hiring manager. Like, these things they're already not meritocracies to begin with. So if we're adding another factor into consideration to make it more fair, I think that's not a big deal.
But the question is, does DEI programs actually fix any of those problems? I mean, I'm sure if you oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Hey, I want to do the least amount of talking. I'm the least knowledgeable person here. I'm just the moderator, but I can't help myself. I really want to say something, which is that what's interesting about this particular issue is the right accuses the left of being racist for focusing too much on race. The left accuses the right for being racist for not considering what Adam is saying, which is that if you're a disadvantaged person, then of course you're disadvantaged and you should be helped out. And both
regardless
of race, and what Adam just said, Micah, you do agree with that if you're disadvantaged, if you're poor, if you have some disadvantages, it's going to be harder to get a job wherever, the FAA and other places. And I think that, Micah, you'd also agree if there were a system such that these disadvantaged people could be given a slight boost and they're just as capable, then maybe they do deserve that job at the FAA. I think the crux of the disagreement is not on whether there are disadvantaged people and on whether those people deserve help. I think the crux of the disagreement is whether DEI oversteps and does more than just correct the differences, but says, you know what, we're going to fuck meritocracy. We're just going to put people in that role. I think Adam and Mason say that DEI is a good faith attempt to correct those disparities. And Micah, I think what you and Luke might say is that it's not. Am I correct at the crux of what that disagreement might be? And why do you think, Micah, that the DEI isn't, as Adam and Mason says, just a good attempt to right the wrong here that exists? Because some people are screwed over by their circumstance because they don't got money.
Yeah.
And how do you?
Sure. I think I agree with how you laid out the crux of the debate. The problem is, again, practically, like how these programs actually play itself out is they don't focus on your background, because if that was the case, then you also have to be including all races, all genders, and all sexual preferences within that, because there are people that are disadvantaged that are all kinds of races and skin colors and sexualities. So you'd have to include that in it, but these DEI programs aren't built for that. They're made for specific people that they think are underrepresented. They're made specifically for minorities because, and they won't acknowledge if a white person, grew up poor and had a tougher background. Practically, how these play out is there's there's a quota. Like we've got to get more minorities in the program, and so I'm all for a program that says, hey, let's look at people from all backgrounds. But I don't think that's what DEI is ever intended to actually do.
So I'm sure in a country of 350 million people, you can find individual DEI programs that maybe Mason and I would say like this is too heavy-handed or it's not doing a good job. The example I brought up is I think the relevant one, which is the one that Trump used to bring this into the mainstream of the FAA, in which case it wasn't really even based on race, because if you're a white person that did not have extracurriculars going up and you weren't earning money till later on in your career, that applied to you as well. Race-based discrimination is already illegal. If someone's breaking the law, then prosecute them. Sure, I have no issue with that. And again, I'd say like it really matters how we define DEI here, because this is, as Mason was saying, a very easy boogeyman to define in like the least charitable, most bad faith way possible to make a certain point. To the extent that those things exist, I don't think Mason and I are going to defend them, but I would say number one, they're good faith. So even when they're not working well, I think they are done in good faith, as Jake was saying. And then number two, I would say that I'm sure they have performance-based metrics to evaluate these things. And if it's in the private sector, I promise you, no company is going to be sacrificing millions or billions of dollars in profit to just hire Black people who are bringing down the productivity. So I do think that these are often marginal changes. And the way it typically is going to work is like they're hiring for 5 positions. They have an applicant pool of 100 people, and maybe everyone's equally qualified, and they pick the people that come from a rougher background. That's not what you're painting out to be, which is like they're looking for like stupid people that are from certain backgrounds and they're putting them in there regardless of their merit. I think it is like a lot more good faith and like a lot more complicated than that.
And I think you both demonstrated that already by showing how quick a lot of corporations were to just eliminate all of these DEI programs. It doesn't speak to the success of the programs itself, but it speaks to how malleable a lot of capitalist interests are as far as curtailing to the demands of the current administration. The fact that Trump is taking such a strong stance against DEI incentivized companies to play ball with that administration because they don't want to be the target of any unjust government attacks. Like, why would they want the Trump administration to hamper down on their programs? They'd rather just get rid of it entirely so they don't have to go through that entire hurdle.
Well, I mean, that could easily be said for Democratic administrations too, that they implemented DEI programs.
But Democrats aren't doing it punitively against corporations that don't have DEI programs. If anything, they'll give more investment to corporations that would have DEI.
They would give more opportunities to companies that do have DEI. Is that what you said?
But that's not punitive measures like with the Trump administration. If a corporation's like, I don't want to do DEI,
well, I want to
hire as many white people as possible or whatever. But
I don't I don't see what punitive measures the Trump administration's taking. But again, that is an incentive for businesses to have DEI programs. So I mean, again, same could be said for Democratic administrations. And you know what? The businesses reacting to the government that's something that's going to happen. So I don't really see how that's entirely relevant.
The relevance is just showing that this is not an example of corporations just like, phew, finally we can get rid of these DEI programs. It's them being malleable and changing to the times that they're currently under the regime.
Well, it could be both. I mean, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. And yeah, for a company to say, great, we don't have to spend a bunch of money and hire more staffers to run this DEI program now, that is equally as valid of saying, and we want to do it because, the Trump administration is in. And so now we feel the freedom to get rid of these programs because those incentives are gone.
This issue is just such a non-issue, especially when you're seeing people that are on the right. And I'm not ascribing any of these principles to the two of you, but you can scroll through X right now and see how many conservative pundits or conservative voices are calling Kendrick Lamar's performance yesterday a DEI Super Bowl halftime show. Like it's proof in the pudding that when you see a non-white person and you have the immediate thought in your mind that, oh my God, this person was put here just because they're Black and not because they're one of the most successful hip hop artists of our time. Like that shows just how stupid it is to identify things as DEI hires or DEI football, DEI commercials. I'm not saying either of you two have those, but this is a perfect example about how this is used as a scare tactic, not as something that's productive.
Well, and honestly, like I can agree with you on that sometimes conservatives are way too trigger happy when it comes to DEI stuff, and they'll immediately say DEI. Like Kendrick Lamar is super successful. Like that's not DEI. That's just him being a great rapper. And so, yeah, I can totally agree with that. But at the same time, too, it's kind of like the story
but
of the
Micah,
bull.
I think,
Wait, hold on. Let me finish.
I don't want to
this
interrupt
point.
you, but I think you'd say the exact opposite for someone like Kamala Harris, right? She's a DEI candidate.
Well, no,
DEI nominee.
In that specific case, Biden came out and said that he was looking for a Black woman. So that's totally different. But hold on.
Solely based on her race.
Yeah, Biden said, I'm going to choose a Black woman. And so there were multiple options of people saying, oh, which Black woman is he going to choose? Yes, that is an example of DEI. But even let's grant the fact that Kamala Harris may be qualified. Let me just grant that. It doesn't mean that the pick wasn't DEI in particular. And going back to the point I was trying to make, it's kind of like the story of the boy who cried wolf, right? A kid cries wolf, the whole town comes, there's no wolf, he's laughing. And that happens a couple times. And then finally, the town just doesn't come, but the wolf is actually there. In the same way, it's like when you saturate our culture with a bunch of DEI hires and programs and things like that, people are going to become so sick of it that they're going to point and say everything is DEI. Now, are they right for that? No, I don't think they're right for that. But that's part of the problem when you saturate companies and the culture with DEI is people are going to get sick of it.
I have a question on this real quick. Do you guys think, and I'm genuinely asking, that when Trump nominates people like Matt Gaetz or who's the Department of Defense guy, Pete Hegseth or RFK Jr., that these are purely merit-based hires and that's just purely based on their experience and expertise?
Well, I mean, obviously, like RFK helped him politically, and so that was a somewhat of a political favor to RFK. But also, I don't think
a meritocracy.
I mean, are you saying he's nominating them because they're white?
I'm saying they're not if you're talking about meritocracy, the idea these are the most qualified people is kind of laughable.
I would say specifically RFK, he's devoted his entire life to ending the epidemic that we're seeing within the health industry.
Would you say he's done good work on vaccine stuff? I don't want to get too deep into this, but
see, that's the point you guys always go to.
I'm asking you a question. I'm not making a point.
I would say that the shift that we've seen in vaccines is insane. When I was born, I think I got between 5 and 8 vaccines. Now a newborn baby is getting within their first year of birth, is getting between 72 and 77 vaccines. That is insane.
Why?
And I know it's a little off topic, but I do want to say the big shift that we're seeing from my parents' generation.
I have a newborn. He didn't have 70.
The shift that we're seeing from my parents' generation to our generation is, obviously technology, but a shift in diet and a shift in vaccines. And consequently, we're seeing autism numbers skyrocket. Those are the 3 big shifts we've seen throughout generations.
There's correlation. There's a correlation
technology and change in vaccines.
But correlation is not always causation, right?
I mean, those are 3 big shifts that we've seen.
Maybe we're just getting better at diagnosing autism as time goes on, and we have better medical technology.
So that every 1 in 22 boys has autism. That's us getting better.
I mean, would you be better at diagnosing someone than someone who actually went to like medical school and trained to become a medical professional?
Well, the Red Sox have won more since 2000 than they have before that. Does that mean when the Red Sox win, we're more likely to be autistic?
Well, I'm talking about the biggest shifts in society that we've seen through children.
I'm saying like correlation without evidence is, you can't say it's a causal relationship, right?
But what do you mean without evidence?
I just mean like, how do we know that they're not just correlated, right? Like there's 2 things could be correlated. Like this is such a stupid example, but like the Red Sox hadn't won for a lot of years. And then since 2000, they've been winning more. But to say that that's that's the cause of autism, like, would obviously be a silly thing to say, just because the two.
I didn't make any claim that that's the cause.
Just
I'm
asking
making an argument that it could be.
Yeah. Okay, guys.
But
That
I
was-
mean, I just want to say one quick thing. I think Kendrick Lamar as well is very talented. I will say it's a little funny that if this was switched and we had a group of background dancers that was entirely white, the media would be going crazy. So I think, if you don't want to look at, the color of the skin, there's plenty of people from all different kinds of backgrounds, white, Asian, Mexican, that they probably were just as great dancers as the people that we saw. So why was it that there wasn't a single other ethnicity seen in the halftime show than Black background dancers? I think that's something to think about.
Mason, you're on mute. I don't know if you're. Uh-oh.
Hello?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I said it might have been because the entire project Kendrick Lamar released that he was performing was about being a Black person in America. But yeah, who am I? Who am I to say anything?
We saw the same thing last year too. So.
No, but I think Luke's point still stands that, if it's a crowd of just white people, that the left, screams and cries about it. Because, where's the representation? Where's the DEI?
Are there examples of this? Because I'm sure there's been plenty of times when there's been only white background dancers. I don't remember ever knowing or caring about this.
I mean, like every time I talk to a liberal about abortion and about Roe v. Wade, they talk about 9 white men deciding, what to do with their bodies. They bring race into it.
I'd prefer.
So there's absolutely,
like these people that you're like
out here right now. Like,
well, no, and honestly,
are the liberals in the room with you right now, Mike?
well, and like honestly, like yeah, you guys sound way more reasonable than most things.
No,
most news outlets.
We sound more
that I see
reasonable
out
than
there.
the liberals that are portrayed in right wing media, and you're going to be correct in that because most people who are on the left are not those psychos. There's a reason why that they're broadcast the most on right wing media. It's because it's an easy caricature of what left wing ideas actually are.
I would say it's the same for the right, though.
I was about to say it seems very easily the same for the right. So
Although
I mean, if you're willing to acknowledge that, then that's fine. But
I do think there is like. It seems kind of like I'm on the left, so I'm going to say this, but I do think there's like a bigger problem on the right now with everything that's going on with MAGA. I don't want to go back to the beginning of the conversation, but the president just casually ignoring the Constitution, I feel like is something that the left-leaning media should be talking about and pointing out that the right is not talking about this.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, the people
not to go
voted.
Off on a tangent.
So at the end of the day, majority of our country.
A majority?
Well,
49.6%.
And I mean,
but okay.
honestly, the issue more is that the people that control the Democratic Party are more that way. Where, yeah, maybe I'd agree that most liberals don't view it that way. But the people that are in control of the Democratic Party are, and they're the ones pushing this stuff.
I mean, what did you think when Kamala Harris was asked, like, how historic is it that you're a Black woman? And she's like, I don't want to talk about my race or gender. I want to talk about being good for the job. Like, it seems like, at least in her campaign, she made a very conscious effort to never bring identity into it. And then still people are calling the Democrats a DEI party when it seems like they strayed very far away from that this election.
Well, she did that intentionally, and I'm sure for political reasons, which was smart. But how she got to that position in the first place is what is in question. And it's because Joe Biden came out and said, I am going to select a Black woman.
By that standard, Joe Biden was a DEI vice president because Obama needed an old white guy on his ticket. It's like, yes, it's same way you said.
Okay.
It's a political calculated move to balance out the ticket. I don't know that's the same thing as DEI programs and hiring as much as just playing politics in a very big country and trying to win an election.
Yeah, but the point with that is that it appeals to the DEI sort of feelings of the Democratic Party that a lot of liberals have.
No, it happens on both sides.
And that's why it's a political move. Like that's why it's something that Biden would even do, because he's trying to win over more of the leftist base.
Every presidential ticket tries to balance the face of the ticket so that it's not too old or too this or that. Like they try to have a balance there where I think like ultimately you're making everything that tangentially involves race to be out to be DEI. When in reality, again, like would you say that Joe Biden was a DEI pick for Obama?
If Obama came out and said, I'm going to select a white old man,
we know from reporting,
then that would have
like
been.
Obama was like, I need to pick an old white dude to like have more appeal in like certain areas of the
then
country.
yeah, that's DEI, and that's a problem. But I mean, but you can't say every ticket has done that. I mean, look at Trump and Vance. I mean, they're both straight white males. So
There's an age thing there as well, but I mean,
and it's also a demographic that specifically you wanted to add to the ticket. But
final topic I want to talk about is hard pivot: immigration. Trump's policy helping the U.S. or hurting the U.S. Whoever wants to take it.
One of the main changes that I have seen that's happened since Trump came into office is that I believe arrests of undocumented immigrants who have not been charged with any crimes, those have skyrocketed. There's currently a lawsuit pending against the Department of Homeland Security from a woman who basically came in from Venezuela. Her and her kids, she spent her entire life savings. They faced sexual violence, threats, kidnapping, and they were approved for an appointment for an asylum hearing. And then Trump canceled that appointment. There's a lawsuit over that now. So, I mean, I just want to say this from the beginning. I think Mason will agree that if someone has come in here illegally and they're committing crimes, they should be deported. Obviously.
Well, that's what's happened under every administration
coming in here
since 1990.
is committing a crime. Crossing our border is committing a crime.
It's a civil infraction. It's a misdemeanor. Luke,
are you a criminal for rolling a stop sign, Luke?
Am I a criminal for rolling a stop sign?
Yes.
Where does that say that I'm a criminal if I roll a stop sign?
I'm asking you. That's the question. Are you a criminal for rolling a stop sign?
But if I just want to read off first. There's a list of about 25 countries that if you simply cross over the border, you're looking at least a year of prison. And it is explicitly stated that is a crime. If you break into a nation,
you can bring about nationalist policies from any country, it doesn't mean we should adopt it.
You are a criminal. If you commit a crime, you are a criminal.
It's a civic violation, even under our own legal jurisdiction, which is what we're trying to say. You would not be a criminal. I'll answer the question for you if you don't want to answer it. You would not be considered a criminal for rolling a stop sign or a red light. You would be in a civic violation.
A stop
and that's the same thing for some.
Stop sign is not a nation's border.
We're talking about
correct. The way to talk about two different things, but we're talking about both.
Hold on. But things to strengthen your argument. If they cross over our nation's border, it is a crime. They are doing something illegal. If you commit something that is illegal, you are committing a crime.
No, that's not true because it's illegal to run a stop sign and it's illegal to run a red light. That doesn't make you a criminal.
That is true.
Is it?
So immigration law is technically civil. You're correct on that. But Congress has specifically expanded the number of immigration violations that can be criminally prosecuted. And illegal entry is one of those.
As a
I
criminal,
believe it rises to a felony.
Yes, as a
second time.
Misdemeanor or felony. Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes a serious crime when someone comes back in after being deported.
Either way, I mean, you roll a stop sign, you break a law. Now, do you break a very, important law? Yeah, I mean, in regards to the whole law, probably not in comparison to other laws. Entering in our country illegally is obviously way more important than rolling a stop sign, and I think it depends on
what your values are. And for me, I'm agreeing with an org like the Cato Institute, which I'm sure y'all would probably agree more than I would. But libertarians agree with this issue. The freedom of movement is something that should be prioritized as a civic protection and as something that's a natural right. Where's my John Lockeans out here?
Is it a value thing? Sorry, let's get the facts right. Is it a civic violation or is it a criminal, as the border czar is saying? What has the border czar said? Hasn't he said it is a misdemeanor or felony? Or is it simply civic, Micah?
Yeah, he has. It is a misdemeanor or felony.
So then, Mason, it's not a matter of values. It's a matter of law. If it's a misdemeanor or felony.
The law is malleable, right? And it's depending on the values of a particular administration. Adam and I are in here to advocate that this administration have got it wrong in this case.
The reality,
and that's the crux of the argument.
But the reality is, But I'm saying but you're saying they should change the law then.
Correct. Yeah. I think with positive law, it shows the malleability.
30 countries are wrong in their law with that as well.
Say again, Luke.
So you would say that there's the list of over 30 countries around the world that they're also.
Yeah, I think if you criminalize freedom of movement, then you're in a draconian society. That's what I would say. And maybe that's too libertarian or too pro-freedom for you guys, but I do believe that you should have freedom of movement. I think that's an important natural
I might be a little bit to the right of Mason on this, just like slightly. I still think we broadly agree that what the Trump administration is doing right now is not great because, again, if you want to talk about efficiency and saving money, every deportation costs like 5 figures per person. And we have now shifted to a system where they're ramping up arrests and deportations for people that are not even accused or charged with any crimes. That to me seems like a waste of money if you want to talk about wasting money.
Well, real quick, Mason, do you believe in open borders?
I think that the bureaucratic costs to particularly track down people who have moved freely is more wasteful spending than it would be through a pathway to citizenship, especially when you bring about.
Well, but that's kind of.
I think that we should just open the border and remove border patrol. No, I'm not advocating for a utopian fantasy, but I do believe that the punitive measures that we have in place for people that are participating in freedom of movement is something that is egregious. And I think that a pathway to citizenship would be better, not only for the economy, but also for the values that we promise to protect, which is natural
But saying
rights.
it's wasteful spending is kind of already begging the question, because you're already assuming that that's something that's bad. So
it's the cost-benefit analysis of deporting someone who has not committed any crime since they've come into the country.
Right, but you're already assuming that that's not something that's good to have borders.
Cost-benefit analysis just means that, like, is the money you're expending on it worth the benefit you're getting from it? How is the country better off if we deport an illegal immigrant who's been here for 15 years, pays their sales
Contributed
taxes
to the economy?
Yeah, a lot of people do pay taxes, by the way, as well. So, like, what does the country gain from deporting? Sure, if someone's come in like the last 6 months and they're killing people, obviously deport them. I don't think anyone's arguing with that. If someone's been here for 5, 10, 15 years, they have roots in the country, they have children, they pay their taxes. What do we gain from spending $10,000 to $20,000 to capture that person, find out where they came from, detain them, and send them back? Why is that worth
Micah,
the money?
you could bring up a good point of hypocrisy of saying they're not subject to the same income taxes that any other American citizen should be, and therefore it's like unfair. Great, let's get them papers so they can start paying their income taxes, and they're treated like every other citizen. That's how it should be.
A lot of them do still pay payroll taxes, actually. Payroll taxes, sales taxes. So, I mean, billions of dollars.
I mean, my perspective on this is the sense of, if your house is on fire, or say your house and your neighbor's house is on fire, and your kid's inside and your neighbor's kid's inside, I'm going to go after my kid first, and then I'm going to try to help my neighbor's kid.
Same.
We have Americans in this country that need help. We have an increasing number of hunger. We have veterans that are on the streets homeless. We have so much that we need to be helping. We have devastations from the fires, from the hurricanes that, thanks to Trump's administration, are finally now getting relief.
Trump was conditioning fire for political reasons.
What are you talking about?
Much because FEMA is a waste of time. Really, $700. I had family that was personally affected by the fires, and they're getting nothing. $700 for what?
So then I'm sure you're upset that Trump told Gavin Newsom they're not going to get fire aid unless they implement voter ID laws.
And we have the money, but we need to put it in the right place. We need
to
talk
about that, Adam.
Should we be playing political games of disaster aid?
And then when we're at a point as a country where we can help these people, no Republican is saying to not help individuals, immigrants that need help. But what we're saying is that there's people in our country that are citizens that we do need to prioritize, and there needs to be a certain notion.
Is Trump prioritizing the people of this country when he tells California we're going to condition fire aid for political reasons, but also at the same time we're going to now spend billions of dollars deporting people that have not committed crimes since coming into the country?
You don't want to hear my thing on the fire, because the fire, frankly, would not be as bad as it was.
That's not what I'm asking. Should Trump be able to tell Gavin Newsom that unless you implement voter ID laws, we're not giving you fire aid?
Yeah. I believe so.
So then you don't actually care about helping the people. It's like, unless they agree with me.
Gavin Newsom is one of the sole reasons why the fires have gotten to be where they are.
So now they have to pay the price by suffering?
One of the biggest reservoirs in the San Fernando Valley has been empty for 17 years because he wanted to save these little fish.
That's not what I'm talking about, though.
Trump opened up the water. Do you think that was like a beneficial strategy?
Opening up the water? When
he opened up several reservoirs in California.
I do. Because
most of the water went to farmlands that weren't even within the region that were affected by the fires. So it seems like somebody who doesn't really know how to use government apparatus in order to get productive outcomes, just doing things for the theatrical, opinions of right-wingers who can say, yes, finally, someone's doing something. Look at this administration at the fastest pace for doing something that isn't even helping the problem that it's said to alleviate.
You also have to understand that all this stuff happened less than a month ago. And I think Democrats like to jump on this whole thing of Trump said he'd do this and he didn't do it right away, so we're going to attack him. Like, people are still talking about groceries, about eggs being up. Yeah, eggs are up because Biden administration sent out a report to kill 100 million chickens. Every single year, there's been numerous interviews of farmers all across the country. Bird flu happens every single year. we don't see the death of chickens that we've seen because the administration sent out a call to kill this. But you guys give, if this stuff is still happening, if we're not seeing relief from the waters, if we're not seeing these changes within 6 months, within a year, sure, come at us. But when it's a month and you expect Donald Trump to just wave his magic wand and you don't give
Who's
it...
advocated for that? Has me and Adam ever said that that's something that should be done?
Oh, yeah. I actually really want to see his magic wand. I want to see him wave it.
Micah,
You're bringing up where the water's going, but this happened.
Wait, I have a question.
If
If Trump had won in 2020, do you think prices on eggs would not have gone up?
I think everything would continue to go up. It's the cost of living. Prices
Then
go
how
up
is it
every
Biden's
year
fault that they
because
were,
of the cost of living.
regardless of who won the election, it was going to go up?
I think that question is completely separate with what I'm talking.
Because he spent a ton of money. But to kind of go back to the point, like maybe me and Luke would disagree on that, but I don't personally like Trump conditioning aid based off of some
Fair.
political win, and so that's not something I like. I would be more in favor of him conditioning aid on like actual policies that would help prevent future fires. So if he said like, hey, you got to open up water reservations or things like that, that's something I would be more in favor of. But I don't like really the president in that sense. So I don't like everything Trump does. That was something that I was a little concerned about. But as far as FEMA goes, FEMA, I mean, I think the idea is that we don't want FEMA to be a federal organization. We'd rather have that each state have kind of their own FEMA.
You're throwing red states under the bus. A lot of these red states, a lot of the repatriation of these dollars are from blue states to red states in the middle of the country. You're hanging them out.
No, I'm not talking about funding. I'm talking about the actual program themselves. So the program, because FEMA, because FEMA is like a federal organization that comes into the state and then they kind of take control and do their things. I think what Trump was trying to say is that he wants to move to a state system where the government, the federal government, funds each state system. That way, because the programs in the states actually know more of the landscape of the states. They know the people of the states, and they're better able to help, as opposed to this federal agency that has no clue about the local region, no clue about the area, coming in and trying to enforce specific things. And so I don't think there's really any question of like just getting rid of FEMA completely as far as like funding for natural disasters from the federal government. I don't think that's even a thing that's being talked about. I think it's just basically going back to federalism and whether or not states should be running these programs or the federal government should.
Just to test the consistency, are you in favor of federalism when it comes to sanctuary cities as well?
In what regards?
Because, I mean, states have the right to not report. If they arrest someone, they find out they're undocumented. Should they be required by federal law to report that to federal authorities? Or should that be up to the state? Because the current way it works is that it's the state and locality's right, whether or not they want to share their local arrest records with ICE or DHS.
Well, if it's a federal law, then the states need to comply with that. It's federal law.
Under existing law, though, under federalism, the states have the right to be sanctuary cities or have sanctuary cities in them. That's what I'm saying.
Under federal law, that's the states
under our system of government, like law enforcement on the state and local level is run by the state and the locality. And the idea behind a sanctuary city is that if they arrest someone and they find out this person is undocumented, that they're not required to call up the federal government and report that to them. Would you say they should be required to report that to the federal government?
I mean, I think in a perfect world, that would be the case. But under the current system, legally, is that allowed? That might be allowed. And if that's allowed, then, Fair. They're legally allowed to do that. Yeah.
Fair.
But I don't think that's a good thing to do. Okay. And I think the federal government using pressure on those cities in various ways to get them to stop doing that is totally valid.
Okay.
Any final thoughts on this from anyone?
Yeah. I mean, I think we kind of missed a little bit of the immigration discussion.
Yeah.
Just in the sense of like, we started talking a lot about what to do with the current illegal immigrants that are in the country, or that have lived here for 15 years. Whereas, a lot of stuff Trump has done, especially in his first week, has been about securing the border now and preventing further illegal immigration. And so, I guess the question for Mason and Adam is, do you guys have a problem with him like declaring a national emergency? Do you have a problem with him building a wall? Are those things that you guys
I don't know that
are
a
again?
national emergency makes sense when the numbers have been going down for the last two quarters of Biden's administration. So like the numbers are just not at the same level they were if you look at like 2023 or even early 2024. So a national emergency, I think, is unwarranted. When it comes to like, should we have technology to stop fentanyl coming in and make sure that people are coming in through ports of entry? I think that's like pretty bipartisan that people should probably go to ports of entry if they can. The question is humanity and like there's a false choice, I think, often presented by MAGA that either you can have an efficient system or you can treat people humanely. I think you can have both at the same time. I think that's part of what was in the bipartisan border bill that Trump tanked. And I know, Luke, you weren't happy about that when I brought it up on the middle ground video. So maybe you guys want to bring that up. But like in an abstract sense, sure, I want a secure border. How you go about doing that, I think, matters a lot, though.
I also think that like it shows where the priority is with like the elimination of the CBP One app, where people were literally trying to schedule appointments with Border Patrol officers, and Trump completely just axing that shows that it's not really that we're trying to go about this in the most just way to provide the right channels for these people that are coming in, but it really is just about the vilification of people for crossing the border in general. And I think if we really care about immigration and we don't want people to come into the United States, we should really look at foreign policy conducted by the US that causes destabilization in regions where people have to seek some sort of new solution. Because a lot of the people that are coming in from Latin America are directly because of US involvement in these governments that causes the collapse or destabilization of the economy. And I know that both you and Micah and Luke would probably do whatever you can to provide for your family. And if that includes crossing over a border in order to give them economic benefit, I think both of you would do that in a heartbeat if you lived in a deteriorating country.
Is that true, guys? Is Mason right?
Yeah, and I mean, my something that I wish the Biden administration would have put more focus on that I frankly didn't see is the cartels play in all this. I mean, Donald Trump coming out and deeming the cartel as international terrorist organizations and going after them, I think is going to be a huge benefit to a lot of, this unsafety that we're seeing in a lot of these South American countries. And you're shaking your head, but I mean, when you look at
I'm shaking my head because you guys talk about being the non-interventionalist candidate and Donald Trump coming in for peace. Designating the cartels as a terrorist org is just giving him justification to invade Mexico. And I don't know how either of you would disagree with that.
I don't understand how you would be okay with terrorist organizations just going out and about.
Are you okay with Trump conducting airstrikes on Mexican territory?
When was it explicitly said he was going to do that?
He has the justification to do that after designating them as terrorist organizations. That's part of the reason he keeps teasing saying the military into Mexico.
There's also
and
so
Luke,
many
I brought
other
in
ways and other approaches you can do that.
I just brought in U.S. interventionalism that causes the destabilization in this country. And you said the solution is more intervention in foreign countries. Like, this is the nonsensical argument of the right's foreign policy of, in one hand, saying this is the peace candidate who wants to get rid of all our involvement in other countries. But the solution to protecting people is to go. Exactly.
So then should we not have also gone after like Al Qaeda, and should we not be getting involved with ISIS?
That's the argument that you have to make. That's what Trump said was bad. Trump said that we shouldn't have been involved in the Middle East. Trump said that the United States should not play a role in trying to be the world police. Are you against the candidate that you've been dick riding this entire conversation? I would make the
argument that the Middle East is a little different than Mexico, considering Mexico is our neighbor, and the Middle East is across the world. If there's different approaches you can take. I mean, we can take internal approaches whether it's within our military, whether it's within different operatives to go in and take the cartel from the inside out. Nobody's saying we need to go nuke Mexico. We need to take airstrikes on Mexico. But if the cartels are a big source of the problem, we need to acknowledge that and find a way to get rid of them.
And just a fun fact, one of the biggest victims of the cartels were people that were in Mexico because of remaining in Mexico in Trump's first term. They were being attacked by cartels, sold into slavery in some cases.
That's separate. The cartels are the source still. If the cartels never existed, the people remain in Mexico would not have these problems. The cartel
If bad
is
guys
the
didn't
problem.
exist, bad things would not
I
happen.
mean, the cartel is responsible for some of the skyrockets we're seeing in fentanyl, for the increase, 300% increase we're seeing in human trafficking.
Sure. I don't think Mason and I are pro cartel. I don't want to speak on his behalf, but
Well, I mean, frankly,
Actually, Adam, you've never
like,
tried the product. I'm just saying.
okay.
if
Fair.
if
Micah,
they're
why
the
is it-
problem,
why-
you go after the source.
Micah, why is it good that Trump categorized or wants to categorize the cartels as terrorist groups? Why is that a good thing, Micah?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I'm not isolationist, and I know there's Republicans that do lean that way and probably voted for Trump because he appealed to them. But that's never been Trump's like MO of like full isolationist. He's always been more of the peace through strength kind of guy, which is why you have someone like Marco Rubio, which very approved bipartisanly. So and that's kind of his philosophy as well. And so, I'm perfectly fine with America going after the cartels in Mexico. Whether that means that the U.S. is going to invade Mexico, I think I'm going to need to see some actual evidence of that's where it's going to lead to. But yeah, absolutely. Let's go after the cartels that are bringing in, as Luke said, a bunch of fentanyl over the border and causing a lot of problems at the border. Absolutely. Let's go after them.
We're coming up on almost 90 minutes. Any final thoughts, questions from... This is a fantastic discussion. We covered DOGE, DEI, and immigration. Anything that anyone feels as they haven't been able to make their full point?
I mean, I know this was not one of the topics, but I'm curious what you guys thought of Trump's 4-dimensional chess play with the tariffs that he ended up backing out of with like no real concessions.
I mean, I think there were some actual concessions that
I think
were
the
given.
coolest thing about Trump though was he got Canada to agree to increase border presence in 2021 when he wasn't even president. Like that's kind of the goated move of Trump was
They said
even through
10,000.
a Biden
Yeah.
administration. Crazy. Incredible.
What was that? What's the point you're
to-
making, Jason? I'm missing that. What's your point?
So Canada
Yes.
announced that they were going to increase their border presence and that immigration was going to be on their docket as one of their top priorities in 2021 when Trump wasn't even president.
Okay.
So it just goes to show like he's the ultimate negotiator that when he's not even in office and it's like another presidential regime,
You're being
Trump's able to
sarcastic,
get that.
but what does that have to do with the efficacy of his tariffs now?
Well,
Yeah.
because he's touting these as concessions that were made when Canada announced this before Trump was even in office. So how can you say that that's a
in
negotiation
2020
token?
in 2021 have they done any of that? No, they haven't. And
They
that's
did. They
the
followed
other
up on
thing.
November of
That's
2020.
the thing. And that's the thing with the tariffs is that it actually it gives these countries actual motivation to
So you think
keep
These
their
are our
word.
allies.
You
This
think
is the
threatening
equivalent of-
global economic collapse is something that is worth getting people to be serious on their particular promises? You think that's a goated negotiation tactic?
part of
It
the deal.
works. It works. I mean,
what happens if you follow through? Do you
Why
think
did
Trump would
Biden-
ever follow through? And that's what these world leaders know is Trump's not going to follow through on it. Otherwise, under his watch, we're going to have economic collapse across the globe.
Mexico
No,
is
it's a-
sending
it's a-
10,000 troops to the southern border in response to the tariffs. Why'd they do the exact same thing under Biden with no threat of tariffs? There's already 15,000 troops at the border from Mexico. It started under Trump in his first term. They sent 10,000 more under Biden. Trump could have these are our allies. This is the equivalent of needing a ride home and calling your friend saying, if you don't give me a ride home, I'm going to kill you. It's like, you can just ask these people to work with you. These are our allies, and threatening, antagonizing them, threatening economic collapse domestically and abroad. It makes no sense. It's just Trump trying to seem like big and tough.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that actually might be true. And my question is, what's wrong with that? Like, you want to be seen as big and tough on the international stage. You
By
want
bullying our
to
friends.
have power. You want to have power in the international stage. And Canada hasn't implemented any of the programs that they passed in 2021. And so
They followed up on 2024.
them saying we're gonna follow through with this, we're gonna increase it. I think they actually announced several increases to the plan because of Trump.
It's another
But-
reason why Trudeau is resigning is because they have started this implementation last year before there were any projections that Trump was the likely winner of the election. And he's resigning because a large majority of Canada wants to see the border presence increase. So this is not, again, something from Donald Trump. You could keep saying 2021. I mentioned that. I get that. But that was because that was when those plans were first starting to be drafted up. And now they're being enforced a year before Trump even took office.
And I just want to be clear, MAGA kind of tells two stories here. Half of them say tariffs are just a bluff, just a negotiating tactic. The other half says tariffs are super based and super awesome. Trump himself was asked before he implemented the tariffs, what could Canada and Mexico do to change your mind? He said nothing. I'm doing tariffs because they're going to make us rich. We're going to have an external revenue service and bring in billions of dollars. But then now suddenly they're not actually important. They're just a negotiating tactic. It kind of
because if he doesn't say that, it's not an actual threat.
But do you believe that tariffs do bring back American manufacturing, or is it just a negotiation token?
No, I mean, personally, my philosophy is more that tariffs should be used as a negotiation tactic.
Right.
And also I think it's valid to use it against enemies like China, but that's kind of a bipartisan thing since both Biden and
those dark
Trump.
MAGA hats are going to be hard to buy. Let me tell you, if we continue these tariffs on China,
which I'm okay with that. If that means if that helps
I'm
America,
okay
I'm okay with
a great
that.
argument for tariffs, Mason. Dark MAGA hats in the country. You've changed my mind.
That's hilarious.
The tariffs did push Canada to put people on the border, right? Right, Mason and Adam?
So the specific agreement on fentanyl czars and all this stuff, there's a PDF that this, I think, was sort of the outline for this was agreed to in December of 2024. Implementation for these programs takes a while. And I'm not even denying that they may be sped
Are you
things
saying
up
it's a coincidence, the timing, that when he threatened these tariffs and then
I'm saying the tariffs were very heavy-handed. He could have gotten these concessions through other means. And it also just seems like he backed off the tariff because the S&P and all the markets started plunging on Monday after he announced the tariffs.
The claim that it was for negotiating, if we take that, let's say it worked. He got his stuff.
Sure, but this is the equivalent of you have a receipt, you go in to return something, and then you put the cashier at gunpoint. You're my negotiating tactics. You already can get these concessions without having to.
Can you? Can you?
Biden did 10,000.
They didn't actually show up. They didn't actually.
No, they did. The 10,000
these started to be implemented last year.
Is that right, Michael?
I mean, I don't think the troops really showed up, and I think the point is, the point is that it says to the other countries Trump means business. He's not gonna let you get away with doing a half effort type thing. You better implement these programs and help us secure the border, or else there's going to be serious consequences.
Do you think if the tariffs actually went through, that'd be a good thing for the country? Let's say someone calls his bluff over the next 4 years and he actually puts in the tariffs, implements them. Is that going to be good for our economy?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Luke?
I'm going to be honest. I don't know the first thing about tariffs.
Okay, fair enough.
I appreciate the honesty.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, it should be a negotiation tactic. And trade wars are not good. I mean, that's just historically proven. So,
wow, way to be free market, Micah. We love it.
Yeah, of course. I'm a principled conservative, but
very few of those left.
You're telling me.
Okay, guys. This is great, huh?
Yeah.
We left some time on the docket, but I think this is a good place to stop it.
Sure.
Appreciate you guys. This is a fantastic conversation. The first of hopefully more than one. And these are important conversations people need to hear, because you usually only hear one side, or you hear 20 seconds of one side and then 15 seconds of the other side. So I'm glad we got to discuss these issues. And people in this country want the same things. There's just disagreement over the actual motives of the people enacting them, and we can't know people's motives.
Yeah.
That's why I think politics is so annoying,
Yeah.
He thinks Elon Musk and Donald Trump are good faith or bad faith, and no one's going to win that argument, because we don't know.
You can sometimes get some idea of motives if you have repeated patterns of action and statements and stuff. But generally, I get what you're saying. But I think in some cases you can kind of ascertain motives.
Yeah.
You can see their fruits. No.
Yeah.
I got that, but
yeah. I mean, I don't think it's great to assume motives. And it's gonna. I like to err on the side of caution when it comes to motives.
But you assume that people pushing DEI are doing it because of some BS, not because they're trying to lift up impoverished struggle?
No, I just think the DEI is BS. Like, I don't actually. I think Mason made a decent point of like these are good faith efforts. Like, I do genuinely believe that like these people believe that they're doing good with DEI programs. I just don't think. I think that the philosophy behind it and the program themselves are nonsense.
But you agree there are people who are struggling in this country who need help, right?
Oh yeah.
And what's wrong with you? What am I missing? If it's good faith and people need help, then they get DEI. What am I missing?
Well, because the philosophy I think is deeply flawed. The philosophy that and that's where I disagreed. I think with Adam and Mason. What they were talking about, I don't think is how DEI plays out in the real world a lot of the time. Like, I think a DEI is more focused on race and sexuality and like putting people that are transgender in positions rather than like, hey, let's look at people that have struggling backgrounds and help them out and at least give them the consideration.
Do you agree with that, Adam and Mason? I mean, wouldn't
that's
DEI
just not borne out in any of the DEI programs I've seen. They still have to meet specific thresholds to even be considered, and then there's still obviously going to be competition. It's just that they're expanding the applicant pool to include people that are not typically part of the applicant pool. Again, I'm sure you can find me one example of like a bad DEI program, and sure, I'll condemn it, but I think like en masse, these are good faith attempts that are generally doing good. Although I'm sure like when it comes to like just specific race-based quotas, I think Mason and I both said that that's not what we support. So like, if you have a caricature, a right-wing caricature of DEI that like paints it out in the most negative, uncharitable way possible, then sure, I might oppose that. But I don't think that's what's actually happening.
And then that's when you get the boogeyman of any person that's not white, you're already suspect of these people being DEI. I mean, Charlie Kirk said it himself. He's going to be feeling nervous anytime he sees a black pilot on an airplane. And that's antithetical to what we should be viewing as America, especially for those of you folks who consider yourselves colorblind. Like, because you're having this boogeyman of DEI makes you so scared of anybody who's non-white. I mean, it kind of proves the point that you're looking at people who don't share a similar background as you as somebody who's inherently unqualified. And I'm not saying either of you are saying that, but I think that that's where these discussions lead when this becomes the big focus of, oh my God, DEI is one of the biggest problems facing America right now, is you start to worry anytime you see somebody that's non-white.
Now I'm confused. So you're saying it's the Democrats who are saying that it's Republicans who are saying, well, if you put a black person in a role, then I don't trust DEI, but that like, in other words, both sides agree that black people should be given opportunities. But I think what you're saying is conservatives view the DEI initiative as undercutting meritocracy.
Right. Well, but Republicans
is that both teams claim to be colorblind and to not be racist. And that's what matters, right? A Republican in good faith says, I'm not racist, and a Democrat in good faith says, I'm not racist. And they have different ways of trying to demonstrate.
What you're trying to make is sometimes you see a minority. Sometimes you see a minority in a position of power, and you'll assume they got that job because of DEI. That's kind of like the default assumption on the right sometimes.
And I mean, just like you guys said that, race hiring based off of race is wrong. I would say on the other side that assuming just because they're black that they're DEI hire is wrong.
Yeah. I mean, in all this, like, I just think as a society, we should just be pushing grit. Yes, everybody comes from different backgrounds. Yes, everybody, someone may come from a background that, has more opportunities than another. But I mean, my grandpa came from a background, and I know it's an anecdote, but he came from literally nothing. He came from Detroit, and he was treated back then. Armenians were treated the same as African Americans. He came from literally nothing and built up an organization. People were telling me couldn't do it. It's because he had people in his life that were installing those values of hard work and grit and determination, where I feel like our society is kind of steering away from that.
I agree. The values of hard work are important, but they're not mutually exclusive with like policy that also helps people. So like on an individual level, work as hard as you can, and like don't give up. But like on a societal policy level, sometimes you do have to take like macro considerations and make policy to help certain sectors of people that are, even if they're trying hard, they might have to try a little bit harder to get to the same place.
And it's uncomfortable having solutions that focus on race, but if those solutions are meant to alleviate problems that were focused on race, there has to be some sort of correlation there.
Yeah, I mean, this is just me, but I think it's okay if maybe they have to work harder. That's life. Everybody has different struggles. It doesn't make it fair. It doesn't make it okay. But that's life. We live in a broken world, and everybody's situations are different. But just because you might have to work a little bit harder than the other person, like, you're gonna grow because of that. You're gonna gain so much because of that. And I just think sometimes we lean on the edge of handouts, where I'm all for equality, but when it comes to equity in the sense of one kid gets a higher box to meet the same height as a kid at the floor, I don't think it's fair.
Yeah, you're down to deal with the struggle with the hand you've been given as a white man in the U.S.
Oh yeah, I mean, my struggles in my life are what made me who I am.
Yeah. All right, guys. Till next time, okay?
All right. Yeah. Thanks,
All
Jake.
right. Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
Check me out at
Yeah.
One Hand Politics. See everybody.
Yep,
Yeah,
I'm
and-
Khan on TikTok.
Micah Kunkel.
I'm on that thing.
Appreciate you guys.